The sun was setting over the quiet, tree-lined streets of Willow Creek, an upscale neighborhood known for its manicured lawns, pristine sidewalks, and tightly knit community. But beneath the surface of this picturesque suburbia lay a simmering tension, a battle of wills that would soon erupt into a full-blown war. At the center of it all was a family that had been pushed to their limits, and a man who had spent his life protecting others, only to find himself fighting for his own. When Daniel and Emily Carter moved into Willow Creek with their 15-year-old son, Lucas, they thought they were leaving behind the chaos of city life for a peaceful, welcoming community. Lucas, born with cerebral palsy, had always been a resilient and kind-hearted kid. Despite his physical limitations, he was a bright, tech-savvy teenager who loved coding, gaming, and tinkering with gadgets. The Carters hoped that this new neighborhood would be a fresh start for Lucas, a place where he could thrive without judgment or prejudice. But their hopes were quickly dashed. From the moment they arrived, the Carters were met with cold stares and whispered comments. The neighborhood was ruled by the Homeowners Association, HOA, and at the helm was a woman named Margaret Hayes. Margaret was the self-appointed queen of Willow Creek, a woman who wielded her power with an iron fist. She was the kind of person who thrived on control, and she had turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom. Her husband, Robert Hayes, was a loud, brash man who loved to boast about his supposed military background, and their son, Tyler, was the embodiment of their entitlement, a bully who tormented anyone he deemed weaker than himself. It didn't take long for Tyler to set his sights on Lucas. At first, the bullying was subtle. Tyler would make snide remarks about Lucas's wheelchair, pretending to offer help while mocking him in front of his friends. "Oh no, did your battery die?" "Yes, you're stuck here all day," Tyler would say, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. His friends would laugh, and Lucas would force a smile, trying to brush it off. But the harassment didn't stop there. Tyler began spreading rumors at school, whispering that Lucas only got good grades because the teachers felt sorry for him. He would accidentally bump into Lucas in the hallways, jostling his wheelchair just enough to make it uncomfortable but not enough to get in trouble. Lucas told his parents about the incidents, but he didn't want to make a big deal out of it. He was stronger than most kids his age, unwilling to let a bully define him. But Tyler was relentless. One day at lunch, Tyler snuck up behind Lucas and jammed a piece of gum into the wheels of his wheelchair. The gum clogged the mechanism, causing the wheels to stick and jerk as Lucas tried to roll forward. The other kids laughed as Lucas struggled to push himself, his arms shaking from the effort. Tyler stood nearby, smirking. "Guess it's time for an upgrade," he sneered. "Maybe your daddy can buy you some real legs." That night, Lucas finally broke down and told his parents everything. Daniel, a retired Navy SEAL, felt a rage he hadn't felt in years. He had spent his life protecting others, but now it was his own son who needed protection. Daniel and Emily reported the bullying to the school, but as with most zero-tolerance policies, nothing substantial was done. Tyler was given a slap on the wrist, a reflection session, and a forced apology. But Daniel knew that wasn't enough. He had seen men like Tyler before, the kind who pushed boundaries because they knew they could get away with it. The breaking point came one crisp fall afternoon when Lucas and his best friend, Ethan, were walking home from school. Tyler and his gang ambushed them, shoving Lucas out of his wheelchair and beating him while laughing. Ethan tried to intervene, but he was outnumbered. By the time Daniel arrived home, Lucas and Ethan were standing in the driveway, bruised and bloodied. Daniel's blood boiled. He had seen a lot in his life: combat, violence, the worst kind of cruelty, but nothing had ever made him this angry. He knew it was time to take matters into his own hands. That evening, Daniel walked to the Hayes house, his footsteps heavy with purpose. He didn't knock, he pounded on the door. When Robert Hayes opened it, Daniel didn't mince words. "Your son and his friends beat up my kid today," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Robert smirked. "Boys will be boys. Maybe your kid should grow a backbone." Daniel's fists clenched, but he kept his composure. He leaned in, his voice a whisper. "Listen to me carefully. If your son so much as looks at mine the wrong way, I will make sure that every cop, every lawyer, and every judge in the state knows exactly what kind of pathetic excuses for parents you both are." Robert's smirk faltered, but Daniel wasn't done. He turned to Margaret, who had just walked in, holding a glass of wine like she was at a country club. "And you," he said, his voice ice cold. "You think you can spit on my son and walk away?" You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Daniel's confrontation with the Hayes family sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. For years, Margaret and Robert had ruled Willow Creek with an iron fist, using their power to bully and manipulate anyone who dared to cross them. But Daniel was different. He wasn't just a retired Navy SEAL. He was a man who had spent his life taking down people far more dangerous than the Hayes family. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began to uncover the truth about Robert's military background. It turned out that Robert had never made it past boot camp. He had been lying about his service for years, using his fake military pass to gain respect and admiration. Daniel exposed him at a Veterans Day fundraiser, humiliating him in front of the entire community. With Robert's credibility shattered, Margaret's power began to crumble. Daniel dug deeper, uncovering evidence of financial fraud within the HOA. Margaret had been using HOA funds to pay for her own home renovations, while slapping other families with fake fines and citations. Daniel compiled the evidence and presented it at the next HOA meeting, exposing Margaret's crimes for the entire neighborhood to see. The fallout was swift. Margaret was voted out of the HOA, and within weeks, she and Robert were forced to sell their house and leave Willow Creek. As they packed up their belongings, the entire neighborhood watched, some with satisfaction, others with relief. The reign of the Hayes family was over. With the Hayes family gone, Willow Creek began to heal. The neighborhood felt lighter, freer, as if a dark cloud had been lifted. Daniel and Emily watched as Lucas flourished, finally able to live without fear or judgment. He and Ethan entered the robotics competition they had been planning, and Lucas's team took first place. Daniel stood on his porch, watching as the moving truck carrying the Hayes family disappeared down the street. Lucas rolled up beside him, a smile on his face. "They're really gone, huh?" he said. Daniel ruffled his son's hair. "They are, and they're never coming back." As the sun set over Willow Creek, Daniel felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He had spent his life protecting others, but this time, he had fought for his own. And in the end, the truth had prevailed. The story of the Hayes family's downfall became legend in Willow Creek, a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance and entitlement. Daniel and Emily continued to be active members of the community, advocating for inclusivity and fairness. Lucas went on to become a successful software engineer, using his skills to develop technology that helped people with disabilities. As for Margaret, Robert, and Tyler, they faded into obscurity, their names whispered in hushed tones whenever the story was told. They had thought they could bully their way through life, but in the end, they had picked the wrong family to mess with. And they had definitely picked the wrong Navy SEAL. The Hayes family was gone, but their shadow lingered over Willow Creek. The neighborhood had begun to heal, but not everyone was ready to let go of the past. For some, the fall of Margaret and Robert Hayes was a victory. For others, it was a reminder of the power dynamics that had once ruled their lives. Daniel Carter had hoped that exposing the Hayes family would bring peace to Willow Creek, but he soon realized that the battle was far from over. A new threat was emerging, one that was more insidious and harder to combat than the overt bullying of Tyler Hayes. It started with small, seemingly insignificant incidents. A few neighbors reported strange occurrences, vandalism on their properties, anonymous letters filled with veiled threats, and rumors spreading through the community like wildfire. At first, Daniel dismissed it as the remnants of the Hayes family's influence. But as the incidents grew more frequent and targeted, he began to suspect that something darker was at play. One evening, as Daniel was walking Lucas home from a robotics club meeting, they noticed a group of unfamiliar teenagers loitering near the park. They were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by hoodies. Lucas tensed, gripping the handles of his wheelchair. "Dad, those guys. They've been hanging around here a lot lately," he said, his voice low. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He had spent years in the military, and he knew how to read a situation. These kids weren't just bored teenagers looking for trouble. They were organized, deliberate. He made a mental note to keep an eye on them. The group of teenagers called themselves the Shadows, and they were the new power players in Willow Creek. Led by a charismatic but dangerous young man named Marcus, the Shadows had taken over where Tyler Hayes had left off. But unlike Tyler, who had relied on brute force and intimidation, Marcus was cunning and manipulative. He understood the power of fear and used it to control the neighborhood. The Shadows targeted the most vulnerable members of the community, single parents, elderly residents, and anyone who dared to stand up to them. They operated in the shadows, as their name suggested, leaving no trace of their involvement. When questioned, they would simply smirk and deny any wrongdoing. Daniel knew that taking down the shadows would require more than just brute force. He needed evidence, and he needed the community to come together. But after years of living under the Hayes family's rule, many of the residents were hesitant to get involved. They had seen what happened to those who crossed the wrong people, and they weren't eager to repeat the experience. The once unified Willow Creek began to fracture. Some residents, emboldened by Daniel's victory over the Hayes family, were eager to take a stand against the shadows. Others, however, were too afraid to speak out. The neighborhood became a battleground, with tensions simmering just beneath the surface. Emily Carter, who had always been the voice of reason in the family, tried to mediate between the factions. She organized community meetings, hoping to bring everyone together, but the divisions ran too deep. The shadows had infiltrated every aspect of life in Willow Creek, and their influence was hard to shake. Lucas, meanwhile, found himself caught in the middle. He had always been a target for bullies, and the shadows were no exception. They taunted him at school, vandalized his wheelchair, and spread rumors about him online. But Lucas was determined not to let them break him. He had faced worse before, and he knew he could count on his family and friends to support him. The turning point came one night when the shadows targeted the Carter family directly. Daniel and Emily were awakened by the sound of shattering glass. They rushed downstairs to find their living room window broken and a brick lying on the floor. Attached to the brick was a note: "Stay out of our way, or next time it won't be just a window." Daniel's blood boiled. He had spent his life protecting others, and now his own family was under threat. He knew he couldn't let the shadows win, but he also knew that he couldn't do it alone. The next morning, Daniel called a meeting with the few neighbors he trusted. Among them was Lisa Thompson, a single mother who had been one of Margaret Hayes's most vocal critics, and Tom Reynolds, a retired police officer who had seen his fair share of crime. Together, they formed a plan to take down the shadows. The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. Daniel and his allies would set a trap for the shadows, using Lucas as bait. They knew that Marcus and his gang wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to humiliate Lucas in front of the entire neighborhood. The trap was set during the annual Willow Creek Fall Festival, a community event that brought everyone together. Lucas, with the help of Ethan and a few other friends, set up a booth showcasing his latest robotics project. The shadows, as expected, couldn't resist the chance to cause trouble. As the festival reached its peak, Marcus and his gang approached Lucas's booth. They began taunting him, knocking over his project and laughing as the pieces scattered across the ground. But before they could do any more damage, Daniel and his allies moved in. The confrontation was intense. Marcus tried to fight back, but he was no match for Daniel's training and experience. Within minutes, the shadows were subdued, and the police arrived to take them into custody. With the shadows defeated, Willow Creek began to heal once again. The community came together to repair the damage that had been done, and the bonds between neighbors grew stronger than ever. Daniel and Emily continued to advocate for inclusivity and fairness, ensuring that no one would ever have to live in fear again. Lucas, inspired by his father's bravery, decided to use his skills to help others. He developed a new app that allowed people with disabilities to report bullying and harassment anonymously, giving them a voice and a way to fight back. As for Marcus and the shadows, they were sentenced to community service and mandatory counseling. It was a second chance, but one that came with strict conditions. Marcus, humbled by the experience, began to turn his life around, eventually becoming an advocate for anti-bullying campaigns. The story of the Carter family's fight for justice became a legend in Willow Creek, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the truth could prevail. Daniel, Emily, and Lucas continued to be active members of the community, ensuring that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. As the years passed, Willow Creek became a model for other neighborhoods, a place where inclusivity and fairness were not just ideals, but a way of life. The Carters' legacy lived on, inspiring others to stand up for what was right and to never back down in the face of adversity. And as Daniel stood on his porch, watching the sun set over the peaceful streets of Willow Creek, he knew that the battle had been worth it. He had fought for his family, his community, and his values. And in the end, That was all that mattered. The shadows were gone, but their impact on Willow Creek would never be forgotten. The neighborhood had been tested, but it had emerged stronger and more united than ever. The Carter's story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. As for Daniel, he knew that his work was never truly done. There would always be new challenges, new battles to fight. But he was ready. He had spent his life protecting others, and he would continue to do so for as long as he lived. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the streets of Willow Creek were bathed in golden light, Daniel allowed himself a moment of peace. He had fought the good fight, and he had won. And that was enough. With the shadows defeated and the Hayes family long gone, Willow Creek had finally found a sense of peace. The community had come together to rebuild, and the scars of the past were slowly fading. Daniel Carter, now a respected figure in the neighborhood, continued to advocate for fairness and inclusivity, ensuring that no one would ever have to endure what his family had gone through. Lucas, now a high school senior, had become a symbol of resilience. His robotics team had won several competitions, and his app for reporting bullying had gained national attention. He was even being considered for a prestigious scholarship to a top engineering school. Life was good, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that their fight wasn't over. One evening, as Daniel and Emily sat on their porch, watching the sunset, Emily broke the silence. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked, her voice soft. Daniel nodded, his eyes scanning the quiet streets. "Every day, but I can't help feeling like there's still more to do. The world's a big place, and there are a lot of people out there who need help." Emily smiled, placing a hand on his. "You've done so much already, Daniel. But if you feel like there's more to do, then we'll do it together." The peace didn't last long. A few weeks later, a new family moved into Willow Creek, the Graysons. They were wealthy, influential, and seemed to have a hidden agenda. The patriarch, Victor Grayson, was a powerful businessman with a reputation for getting what he wanted, no matter the cost. His wife, Evelyn, was a socialite who quickly ingratiated herself with the remaining elite of the neighborhood. Their son, Damien, was a quiet, brooding teenager who kept to himself. At first, the Graysons seemed harmless, but Daniel's instincts told him otherwise. He had seen men like Victor before, men who used their power and influence to manipulate others. And Damien's behavior only added to Daniel's suspicions. The boy was often seen lurking around the park at night, and rumors began to circulate about his involvement in petty crimes. When Daniel tried to approach Victor about the rumors, he was met with a cold, dismissive smile. "My son is a good kid," Victor said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I suggest you focus on your own family, Mr. Carter." Daniel knew then that the Graysons were trouble. But without proof, there was little he could do. The situation escalated when the shadows, thought to be disbanded, began to resurface. Graffiti appeared on the walls of the community center, and several homes were vandalized. The police were called, but no arrests were made. The community was on edge, and Daniel knew that the Graysons were behind it. He began to dig deeper, uncovering a web of corruption that extended far beyond Willow Creek. Victor Grayson had ties to organized crime, and he was using the neighborhood as a front for his illegal activities. Damien, it turned out, was the leader of the New Shadows, using his father's resources to recruit vulnerable teenagers into his gang. Daniel knew that taking down the Graysons would be his toughest challenge yet. But he also knew that he couldn't do it alone. He reached out to his old allies, Lisa Thompson, Tom Reynolds, and a few others who had stood by him during the fight against the Hayes family. Together, they formed a plan to expose the Graysons and put an end to their reign of terror. The plan was risky, but it was their only shot. Daniel and his allies would set a trap for Damien and his gang, using Lucas's upcoming robotics competition as bait. They knew that Damien wouldn't be able to resist the opportunity to humiliate Lucas in front of the entire community. The competition was held at the local high school, and the turnout was impressive. Lucas's team was a favorite to win, and the atmosphere was electric. But as the event reached its peak, Damien and his gang made their move. They stormed the stage, knocking over equipment and causing chaos. But before they could do any real damage, Daniel and his allies moved in. The confrontation was intense, but Daniel's training and experience gave him the upper hand. Within minutes, Damien and his gang were subdued, and the police arrived to take them into custody. With Damien in custody, Daniel turned his attention to Victor and Evelyn. He had gathered enough evidence to expose their illegal activities, and he presented it to the authorities. The Graysons were arrested, and their assets were seized. The community breathed a collective sigh of relief, knowing that the threat was finally over. But the victory came at a cost. Lucas, who had been caught in the crossfire during the confrontation, suffered a broken arm. He was shaken but determined to move forward. "We did the right thing, Dad," he said, his voice steady. "And I'd do it again if I had to." Daniel couldn't have been prouder of his son. Lucas had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger for it. He was a true Carter, through and through. In the aftermath of the Graysons' downfall, the community began to heal once again. The Shadows were disbanded for good, and the neighborhood came together to repair the damage that had been done. Daniel and Emily continued to advocate for fairness and inclusivity, ensuring that no one would ever have to live in fear again. Lucas, inspired by his father's bravery, decided to use his skills to help others. He developed a new app that allowed people with disabilities to report bullying and harassment anonymously, giving them a voice and a way to fight back. As for Damien, he was given a second chance. After serving his sentence, he began to turn his life around, eventually becoming an advocate for anti-bullying campaigns. It was a long road to redemption, but with the support of the community, he was able to find his way. The story of the Carter family's fight for justice became a legend in Willow Creek, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the truth could prevail. Daniel, Emily, and Lucas continued to be active members of the community, ensuring that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. As the years passed, Willow Creek became a model for other neighborhoods, a place where inclusivity and fairness were not just ideals, but a way of life. The Carters' legacy lived on, inspiring others to stand up for what was right and to never back down in the face of adversity. And as Daniel stood on his porch, watching the sun set over the peaceful streets of Willow Creek, he knew that the battle had been worth it. He had fought for his family, his community, and his values. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The Shadows were gone, but their impact on Willow Creek would never be forgotten. The neighborhood had been tested, but it had emerged stronger and more united than ever. The Carters' story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. As for Daniel, he knew that his work was never truly done. There would always be new challenges, new battles to fight. But he was ready. He had spent his life protecting others, and he would continue to do so for as long as he lived. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the streets of Willow Creek were bathed in golden light, Daniel allowed himself a moment of peace. He had fought the good fight, and he had won. And that was enough. The fall of the Graysons marked a new chapter for Willow Creek. The neighborhood had weathered storms, faced down bullies, and emerged stronger each time. Daniel Carter, now a local hero, continued to serve as a pillar of the community. His son, Lucas, had graduated high school with honors and was preparing to leave for college on a full scholarship. Emily, ever the backbone of the family, had taken on a leadership role in the HOA, ensuring that the neighborhood remained a safe and inclusive place for everyone. But peace, as Daniel had learned, was often fleeting. One crisp autumn morning, as Daniel sipped his coffee on the porch, he noticed a familiar figure walking down the street. It was Marcus, the former leader of the Shadows, now a young man trying to rebuild his life. Marcus had served his time, completed community service, and was working at a local auto repair shop. He had even started mentoring at-risk youth, using his past mistakes as lessons for others. Daniel waved him over. "Marcus, how's it going?" Marcus hesitated, then approached. "Mr. Carter, I just wanted to say thanks for giving me a second chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying." Daniel nodded. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Marcus. Just make sure you use it well." Marcus smiled faintly. "I will. I promise." Despite Marcus's efforts to turn his life around, not everyone in Willow Creek was ready to forgive him. Some residents still saw him as a threat, a reminder of the chaos he had once caused. Tensions simmered beneath the surface, and it wasn't long before those tensions boiled over. One evening, Marcus's car was vandalized outside the repair shop where he worked. The words "Go away" were spray-painted across the hood in bright red letters. Marcus was shaken but determined not to let it derail his progress. He reported the incident to the police, but without witnesses, there was little they could do. Daniel, however, wasn't willing to let it slide. He knew that if the community didn't come together to support Marcus, the cycle of fear and retaliation would continue. He called a meeting with the HOA and urged them to take a stand against hate and prejudice. Marcus made mistakes, Daniel said, his voice firm. But he's trying to make amends. If we don't give him a chance, what does that say about us? The meeting was tense, but in the end, the community agreed to support Marcus. They organized a neighborhood watch program to ensure everyone's safety and began hosting events to foster unity and understanding. Just as things seemed to be settling down, a new threat emerged. A series of break-ins rocked Willow Creek, targeting homes on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The intruders were careful, leaving little evidence behind. The police were baffled, and the community was on edge. Daniel, ever the protector, took it upon himself to investigate. He enlisted the help of Tom Reynolds, the retired police officer, and together they began piecing together clues. What they discovered was alarming. The break-ins were part of a larger operation, orchestrated by a sophisticated criminal network with ties to organized crime. The leader of the network was a man named Victor Kane, a ruthless enforcer with a reputation for violence. Kane had been operating under the radar for years, using small towns like Willow Creek as testing grounds for his operations. He had chosen Willow Creek because of its reputation as a tight-knit, resilient community, a challenge he couldn't resist. Daniel knew that taking down Victor Kane would be his toughest challenge yet. Kane was smart, ruthless, and had resources far beyond anything Daniel had faced before. But Daniel also knew that he couldn't do it alone. He reached out to his old allies, Lisa Thompson, Tom Reynolds, and even Marcus, who had proven himself to be a valuable asset. Together, they formed a plan to expose Kane's operation and bring him to justice. The plan was risky, involving undercover work, surveillance, and a high-stakes confrontation. But Daniel was determined to protect his community, no matter the cost. The final showdown took place at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Daniel and his team moved in under the cover of darkness, catching Kane and his men off guard. The confrontation was intense, with gunfire echoing through the empty halls. But Daniel's training and experience gave him the edge he needed. In the end, Kane was subdued, and his operation was dismantled. The police arrived to take him into custody, and Willow Creek was safe once again. The victory came at a cost. During the confrontation, Marcus had been shot while protecting Daniel. He was rushed to the hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery. Daniel stayed by his side, refusing to leave until he knew Marcus would be okay. When Marcus finally woke up, Daniel was there. "You saved my life," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Marcus smiled weakly. "I owed you one, Mr. Carter. You gave me a second chance. I wasn't going to let you down." Daniel squeezed his hand. "You've more than earned it, Marcus. You're one of us now." With Victor Kane behind bars and the criminal network dismantled, Willow Creek began to heal once again. The community came together to celebrate their victory, but also to reflect on the cost of justice. Marcus's bravery had earned him the respect and admiration of the neighborhood, and he was finally able to move forward with his life. Lucas, inspired by the events, decided to postpone his college plans for a year to work on a new project, a community center for at-risk youth. He wanted to create a place where kids like Marcus could find support and guidance, a place where they could learn from their mistakes and build a better future. Daniel and Emily supported him wholeheartedly, knowing that this was his way of carrying on the family legacy. "You're going to change lives, Lucas," Emily said, her eyes shining with pride. "Just like your father." The story of the Carter family's fight for justice became a legend in Willow Creek, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, the truth could prevail. Daniel, Emily, and Lucas continued to be active members of the community, ensuring that the lessons of the past were never forgotten. As the years passed, Willow Creek became a model for other neighborhoods, a place where inclusivity and fairness were not just ideals, but a way of life. The Carters' legacy lived on, inspiring others to stand up for what was right and to never back down in the face of adversity. And as Daniel stood on his porch, watching the sun set over the peaceful streets of Willow Creek, he knew that the battle had been worth it. He had fought for his family, his community, and his values. And in the end, that was all that mattered. The shadows were gone, but their impact on Willow Creek would never be forgotten. The neighborhood had been tested, but it had emerged stronger and more united than ever. The Carter's story became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. As for Daniel, he knew that his work was never truly done. There would always be new challenges, new battles to fight. But he was ready. He had spent his life protecting others, and he would continue to do so for as long as he lived. And in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the streets of Willow Creek were bathed in golden light, Daniel allowed himself a moment of peace. He had fought the good fight, and he had won. And that was enough. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.